and a very warm welcome to the IMF. So wonderful. It's wonderful to see so many people here in person, and of course to have so many colleagues online as well. I'm just looking at you all here. Thank you for joining us today. This meeting is actually one of the highlights of the week because civil society is such an important voice for us here at the IMF. So this is something we really look forward to. And the fact that we do have the managing director with us here this morning, I think attests to the importance that we attach to this meeting. So just a couple of housekeeping things. Those of you in the room, when we get to the Q&A, which will be very shortly, we have some microphones, so please step up. And those of you online, please raise your hand, and we'll try and take as many questions as we can. If you are not actually speaking online, please be so kind as to mute your microphone in the usual way. And we will try to take as many questions as we can. With that, I want to turn to Kristalina. She's so well known to all of you, known as a friend of civil society for a very long time. And I'm going to ask Kristalina just to set the table for us a bit, and then we will get to your questions. Kristalina.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jerry. The audience in presence would agree with me that your second welcome was even warmer than the first one. And for those online, we started without you guys, and then we quickly understood that not possible to go that way, so here we are. May I add to what Jerry said? It is really great to be together in the same room, and could have not been more important because we are faced with really complex and difficult challenges. Over the last 3 years since we last met in person, there have been incredible developments, unthinkable events. First, the pandemic, still with us. Then Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Then throughout this year, I'm sure you have noticed there have been very significant negative climate events on all continents. And all of this combined has created a cost of living crisis that is top of mind everywhere, but is particularly difficult for poor people and for poor countries. So when we look at the policy environment that we will be in this week, what is standing high in my mind are the two tasks we have to pursue simultaneously. One, to stabilize the world economy. Two, to transform it to a more resilient future. What is the economic picture? Unfortunately, it has darkened over this last year. In October 21, during our annual meetings, we were optimistic. The recovery from COVID was underway. We had vaccines protecting people. Yes, not fairly distributed, but progress was made even in that regard. And we thought 2022, this recovery would deepen. This is not what we are experiencing, unfortunately. What has happened is the combined shock from Omicron in January, the war in February, and the consequences of this war. They have pushed prices up in a way we have not seen in decades, and that has called on central banks to tighten financial conditions. That led to a very rapid and still ongoing appreciation of the dollar. What does it mean for countries that import dollar-denominated goods? Inflation is pushed even higher. For countries with high level of dollar-denominated debt, very difficult to service this debt. So the way I would sum this up is that we are witnessing a shift from the economy of the last 30 years that was relatively predictable, relatively stable, operating under international rules-based conditions, low inflation, low interest rates, to one that is more volatile, less predictable, in a world that is risking to get fragmented to a point that it would hit the prospects for well-being of people for the future. And this is the context in which we are meeting this week. The responsibility on policymakers is extremely high. What can we do? Is there a road that can lead to a more stable and hopefully in the future fairer, more resilient economy? At the IMF, we are advocating for three things. One, deal with the risks inflation causes to macroeconomic and financial stability, to growth and employment. If inflation is left unattended, it can, the technical term is de-anchor. The non-technical I would use is it can turn into a runaway train. And what it means is that the foundation for growth, which is price stability, would be gone. Who is going to pay the highest price? Poor people, for whom inflation is like a tax on their incomes. So dealing with inflation is paramount. But policymakers have to be very careful how they do it. If they do too little and walk out of this task too fast, the job is not done. Inflation would hammer us. If they do too much, then we risk to get into a prolonged recession. So working on that balance is going to be critical. Two, we have vulnerable people, we have vulnerable businesses. They need and deserve help. But help is much harder to come after COVID that has exhausted the buffers of in many countries. So fiscal support has to be really well thought through, very well targeted. Help those who really must be helped. Don't spread fiscal support to the wealthy because they don't need it. And it is costly, not effective. So again, very important how fiscal policies are structured. And three, yes, it is hard for everybody, but it is harder for vulnerable emerging markets, for poor countries. So collectively to support these countries for their own good, but also for the good of all of us, we do need to have stability in our world. And as we do that, we cannot forget that there are transformative forces to make the world more resilient. What are they? And I would give you my simplest definition of resilience, which is resilient people that are educated, healthy, they have good social protection under their feet. Resilient society, not just economy, but society where there is fairness in how the benefits of growth are shared among people. And a resilient planet, one that can sustain us as we grow in population numbers. And that means addressing the risk of climate change. So getting that resilient mindset, thinking about a world of more frequent and devastating shocks is what policymakers have to do as they work to stabilize the economy of today. I would finish with a word for us at the IMF. We are determined to do our part as we did it post-COVID. Sorry, not post, when COVID hit. Since then, we have provided nearly $270 billion of lending to countries. What we are seeing is demand for IMF support has gone up, not surprisingly. Since Russia's war in Ukraine, we had 16 countries coming for programs or augmentation of existing programs. This is about close to $90 billion. And we expect to see in the next months, over the next year, a likelihood of the fund being called for help. In fact, some 21 requests, I don't know how many of them would turn into programs, but currently our staff is working on a large number of requests. We are stepping up our country-specific engagement on the policy front because of this difficult set of policy choices countries are facing. We are also innovating. We have quickly saw the food crisis, the food shock as being a horrible burden for 48 countries. So 2 weeks ago, we have approved a new food shock window in our emergency financing to help countries. We estimate some $9 billion of balance of payment shortfall in middle and low income countries. And what I'm particularly proud to report to you today is that we are funding this window with on-lending for the low-income countries, with on-lending of SDRs, something that we have innovated last year. We are also having our Resilience and Sustainability Trust operational. The first 3 countries have staff-level agreements to go to board. Do you want to know which are the countries? Yes? Of course. Barbados, Costa Rica, Rwanda. And we have a pipeline of countries, among them, for example, Bangladesh, a very, very vulnerable to climate shocks countries, and we hope to move very quickly. The overall on-lending is around $75 billion. $40 billion is the commitment to the RST. Demand for RST is very strong. So we might be saying, well, maybe we have to see how we can do even more. But I have no illusion that the only way we can be successful is not by what we do, but how we do it, how we work with our members, how we work with other organizations, how we work with you, so we can do the best possible in these 2 critical areas of stabilizing the world economy, transforming it to a more resilient future. And with this, I would turn the floor to you. Actually, you know what we didn't do, Jerry? What we didn't do is to say, good morning, everybody. I want to hear it. Excellent.
Great.
Yep.
Really great. Thank you, Kristalina. So look, raise your hand, please, if you're online. And I was going to say, please step up to the microphone, but you're already stepped up to the microphone, so this is fantastic.
Yes.
But I do want to begin with a question that had already come in just in advance, and then we'll go in person.
We thought you would be shy to ask questions,
Yeah,
but clearly they are not.
It's
You're
just like
not.
Georgetown the other day with the wonderful students at Georgetown. Look, the first question is from Abdul Rahman El Mahdi. Abdel is coming from the Sudanese Development Initiative on Zoom. So, Abdel Rahman, please come in.
Where is?
Hello, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So, yeah, good morning, Jerry and Dr. Kristalina. Nice to be with you today at this CSO Townhall meeting. So, as Jerry mentioned, my name is Abdurrahman Al-Mahdi. I am the director of a national NGO called Sudanese Development Initiative, also known as SUDIA, and I'm joining you today from Sudan in Africa. And my question is around climate change issues. I mean, you touched on that lightly just now, Dr. Kristalina, but climate change and biodiversity issues are being overshadowed and repeatedly pushed down on the global agenda. First, the coronavirus pandemic, then the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and now soaring inflation. As 2022 closes, two significant events are taking place. The COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh and the Biodiversity Conference in Montreal, Canada.
The tools that we provide, we see how to search for opportunities. So,
can you please share with us the IMF agenda for these two major events? And regarding the latter, the Biodiversity Conference, although I've been told that the IMF is not participating in that conference, but what can the IMF be doing to ensure these talks, now going on for 4 years, materialize and a deal is reached? Another related question, can you tell us how the IMF is helping and supporting the member countries stabilize their economies during these turbulent times, whilst also ensuring that climate change challenges remain front and foremost on the agenda? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abdel Rahman. And we're going to turn from your questions on climate to questions in the room. And would you like to identify yourself, please?
Yes. Good morning. My name is Daniela Verdeja from Latin American Network for Economic and Social Justice, LatinDA. And well, thank you for taking my question. My concern is in the middle of this multiple simultaneous and worsening crisis that are pushing low and middle income countries into high risk of debt distress. And given the fact that the debt service suspension initiative and the common framework have not solved yet the problems of low and middle income countries, and given that the composition of debt shows that there is an important share for private creditors, how will the IMF facilitate the participation on a binding basis approach for these creditors? And will the IMF support a new SDR's issuance to avoid this concerning increase in debt?
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. Let's take one more. Please identify yourself, then we'll ask Kristalina to respond.
Okay, good morning. My name is Mokopan Sandaluka from the Tax Justice Network Africa in Kenya, but I'm based in Zambia. So my question is around the food crisis, and I think you touched it briefly, but specifically, what is the IMF doing to support countries given the food crisis exacerbated by the Russia-Ukraine war? And in the context, more specifically around domestic resource mobilization, we know that you give these facilities to cushion the impact, but what is the IMF doing to enable countries mobilize resources internally so that then they can address their food security challenges more sustainably? Thank you.
Excellent questions.
Okay, Kristalina, thank you.
Great questions. So on climate biodiversity, we have transformed the IMF from an institution that was interested and engaged on climate, but without a strong systemic role, to an institution that is and will be even more systemically significant in the fight against climate change. Why? Because climate risks are macro-critical, I'm sorry, I have a little bit of a cold. My apologies. And acting on climate can generate growth and employment. So it is also macro-critical. And I always say a very simple message. It is existential threat to humanity. Inflation is bad. I lived under hyperinflation. I can tell you it's a horrible thing. But basically we survive. Recession is very bad. It does create pain. But we survive. Yes, there are some people who really lose their lives in an environment like this, but humanity survives. The climate crisis, sorry, unless we abate it,
Kristalina?
we don't survive. My apologies to the audience. So what do we do? 4 things. Include climate in Article 4. Include climate in financial sector assessment. Lend for structural transformation through the Sustainability Trust, and transform data. And it is the latter that matters, especially for biodiversity. Why? Because when we integrate natural capital in the way we value the wealth of nations, then biodiversity from an invisible element in our economy becomes visible. So we go to COP with the RST delivered, and while we do not usually take part in biodiversity convention meetings, we will contribute intellectually to the discussions that would take place there by making the case for biodiversity conservation. And I have some very smart economists that are crunching numbers that can show the value of an elephant, the value of a whale. So that is the way of economists to be relevant to protect biodiversity. Daniela, on the question of debt, we have created, not we, the G20 has created a framework to deal with debt when it is not sustainable. It has been slow to become operational, but now we do have the case of Zambia. We hope by the end of the year to complete it, to complete Chad, and then to have more countries coming for treatment. What we are advocating for is more predictability on debt resolution, clarity of timeline. So when it starts, what happens next, and by when it should be done. And we also argue that middle-income countries in debt distress should also benefit from a debt treatment as it is in the common framework. What does it mean? Bring all creditors at the table. Bilateral creditors as well as private sector. Use the IMF, and for low-income countries, it is IMF, World Bank, debt sustainability analysis as the foundation for debt restructuring. And then have a resolution in a timely manner. We are also working on a very important topic, which is how to include in contracts that are being signed today collective action clauses that, for example, for countries vulnerable to climate shocks, allow immediate suspension of debt service if a climate shock occurs. And I'm hopeful we would see a positive outcome of this work this year. On the SDRs, our determination today is to make SDRs provided to countries in strong reserve position work for the vulnerable countries. In terms of another SDR allocation, this this requires, it is mandated, that we do an assessment whether there is a gap in reserves globally and for this gap to be filled. I just want to caution that we are in a different environment today than where we were in last year, 2021. What is the difference? Very high inflation. When you have very high inflation, the issue of liquidity has to be taken seriously. And then how can we make sure that we actually provide it only to the countries that really need it? And that is not that's not a simple and easy question. Of course, we always look for ways in which we can serve the membership. So Daniela, I'm just giving you a sense as what is the process we have to go through. On food crisis, I don't know whether there are people here who have dedicated their lives to fighting hunger. I'm looking at the room, whether there are organizations that have been on that front line. It is the world's greatest solvable problem, because even today we produce enough food plus to feed everybody on this planet. So there is a production issue, there is a distribution issue, there is a horrible issue of waste of food. In other words, we are hitting a food crisis, but even without this food crisis, we are not doing so well. What is truly impossible to put up with is that we have been seeing the numbers of people going hungry down and down. And for the last 2 years, and especially this year, and I predict, unfortunately, next year, they're going up. Now we have 345 million people in acute food insecurity. Acute food insecurity means that their lives can be in danger. And over 850 million people malnourished. Malnourished is a technical word. For a kid, it means I'm not going to reach my full potential, because as I grow, my brain is not going to develop as the brain of kids that have good nutrition. So it's kind of a more than any other problem, one that we have to take extremely seriously as a world community. What we do at the fund, one, we look into the severity of the food crisis, where it is most profound, and what are the economic consequences. Two, we integrate in our programs. We already have, like in Mozambique and other countries, Capo Verde, we integrate in our programs measures that address food insecurity. And three, as I mentioned, we have created a new window in emergency financing to address this topic. But perhaps the most important thing we do is to bring other organizations to come together with other organizations. World Bank, World Trade Organization, because trade restrictions add to the problem to this crisis. World Food Program, they are on the front line to help. And FAO, the Agriculture Organization. So collectively, we can mobilize and deploy resources more effectively than each and every one of us would do on our own. On the question of domestic resource mobilization, I was going to say, don't ask this question because I would talk for 45 minutes. So here is where we are. Half of low-income countries have tax collection that is below 15% of GDP, meaning they cannot fund their services in a way that meets the need of people. And the problem is that they are not capturing sources of revenues that should be captured, like high income households, profits from good profitable businesses to the full extent. In many countries, property is not taxed. Well, when we talk about wealthy people that can pay for property taxes, that is not happening. So we work with countries to help them go across that 15% up and up. And if you look at low-income countries, those that are more successful in educating their people, in providing health services, in having good investment in infrastructure, are those that have higher domestic resource mobilization, because this is where you have predictability of resources. Of course, we also need more investment, more support from donors, more attractiveness for private investments in these countries. But guess what? There is correlation between quality of governance and domestic resource mobilization and attractiveness for money to come in. So this is what we are dedicated to work on at the fund, to improve the resources that countries can rely on, and then look at the quality of spending so money is well invested in what matters the most. So, you know what? You need to keep me short, because otherwise these queues would never melt.
So, great, Kristalina, covered a lot of ground. Let's everyone keep it short, and we'll really,
and I'll keep it short,
and
I
we'll
promise.
try and get through as much as we can. You can see how many people are lined up and online too.
I need to say to you that I'm a former professor. I rest my case. Okay, let's go to the queue.
But let's start over here. Let's take, we'll take a few in the room. We'll take a few online as well. Okay, Kristalina?
Mm-hmm.
So,
thank you. My name is Abubakar Kamara, the coordinator for Budget Advocacy Network, Sierra Leone. Madam, you were invited in the finance meeting for which you pull out 9 minutes. So is the IMF really ready to work with the international education community in terms of working towards the plan that was set in that meeting? And also, again, I think as a first step, we might want to say that the aspect of education financing be part of the spring meeting, looking at the impact of tax, debt, austerities, and wage bill around education policies and finances. The second one, shortly, of course, you agree with me, there are countries that need more support than others. For example, if you take Sierra Leone as a case in point, we have the Ebola that crashed our economy. We have the COVID. We have this Ukraine war. You just mentioned around tax to GDP. It's below 15%. We've seen the SDR distribution, wherein those that really need it more has the least. Is the IMF willing to do the second one, considering the aspects of need in terms of ensuring that it's able to solve the problem? Thank you.
thank you very much. Let's try, if we can, keep it to one question, just to be fair to everyone. Sir.
Thank you very much. Luis Vieira with the London-based Bretton Woods Project. I have a quick comment. I found it interesting that you didn't mention speculation in foodstuffs and the concentration of corporate power in the dynamics of the food crisis. But that's not my question. My question relates to, the Secretary General recently noted that multilateralism is under severe threat. And we have been for many years talking about the governance deficit and democratic deficit at the fund. And I'm wondering how you feel about the prospects of the upcoming quota review. And if it's unsuccessful, if you could maybe share your thoughts on what the implications of lack of progress on the quota reform, which links into surcharges, SDRs, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's
Okay,
switch
Luis
back in.
Muniz from Mexico. My organization is Palehuillolia. And my question is, it could be possible to have a special funding program for civil society organizations managed from civil society organization, not government, because we are dealing with the corruption of the governments. That's my question.
Okay, let's try and take a couple online, shall we?
Yes.
Just to bring in the online audience. I see Charles from the Alpha Sirius Foundation and Sugat Kodit Waku. Charles and Sugat, do you want to try? Come in.
Good morning. Good morning, Kristalina, Madam, and all. I have been associated with the World Bank since 2015. Have submitted 4 projects in 2015. I have not received a reply for so far. I have participated in meeting Bali, Indonesia, and Peru. The project I have submitted so far, the community empowerment in country rainforest and evergreen forest conservation, focusing climate change and food security. The security. Second one is that destitute women, widows, and school drops out youngsters development in needy. Rural farming and small fishing communities who living in below the poverty line, in most poverty extinct 500 villages in Mana and Bolatev, Batikola, Ampara, and Monaragala district of Sri Lanka. Now, next one is that social and economic supplement of chronic kidney disease affected 70,000 small-scale rice farming and families in North Central, and Northwestern and Central province. The people in Sri Lanka are suffering from all aspects of food and health. This is a very appreciated opportunity to provide relief. How can you support this? Thank you.
Okay, Sugath, thank you very much for those questions, which I think we covered somewhat, but climate change, food security, the risk to small-scale farmers, and, the Sri Lanka situation, of course. Charles, why don't you come in, and then Kristalina will come back to you.
Thank you for the opportunity, Managing Director, and the rest of the people on the call. I think for me, I'm speaking for the people of Africa, the youth of Africa. I come from poverty myself, and it was so hard for me, to get an education. And I think in the process of, trying to go to school and get an education, I got an opportunity, to study online and be able to finish and, rise to be the president of Alpha Sirius Foundation. But not so many as lucky as I am, because there are so many problems. I think like one of them said, the resources that are going to the governments are not fully utilized. So for me, I'm looking at issues of access to funding, because we've dealt with so many people that are trying to deal with the issue of, accessing funding. A lot of young people are unemployed, and I've got the statistics. I can send that over email. Most of the statistics are from the World Bank and IMF itself, and that's becoming a challenge because a lot of young people, Africa has the largest youth population in the world, and a very active, population that can be integrated in the work sector, or, that can provide, resources in terms of work capital. So I know IMF is already doing so many things to help with the problem of unemployment, problems of, lack of access to funding, and even problems of being unable to, get opportunities to go to school. But I'm curious to know how after the pandemic, the World Bank and the IMF are trying to resolve those issues. And I'll close with this because I know there's so many people queued up. In Malawi, where I come from, right now I live in the United States, but Malawi has had a big problem, in as far as unemployment and being unable to have access to funding is concerned. And I think, these problems are rising after the COVID pandemic and a lot of youth, facing these problems. I'm curious to know how the IMF would help, not because I know that aid is one thing that's also been a hindrance to development, but I'm talking about training, I'm talking about giving skills to young people, and I'm also, talking about just providing the funding through the banks and then the young people having access to this funding and, being able to build entrepreneurship activities that will help, to uplift a lot of people from poverty. So I'm curious to know what the World Bank and the IMF would be able to resolve, especially the unemployment and the lack of access to funding and the lack of access to education, because that affected me and it's affecting a lot of young people. And this is the biggest problem in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. Great to have you join us from Malawi. And of course, we had Sugath just before him from Sri Lanka, and a range of other questions there, Kristalina, some of which you've already touched on, but you may want to.
So let me start with education, and it is actually connected to the last question of Africa youth. My understanding is I actually was in New York, and the evening I was at the gathering to recognize those who have driven the Education Summit agenda. And there I learned that I was criticized for not being on a panel that day. So for full disclosure, we got an invitation very late. I was already booked to do other things. My only opportunity was to join the dinner. But let me state it as clearly as I can. I may have not been on the panel, but I'm definitely on the job. I'm a strong believer that education is the best investment we can make for our future. And I will tell you a story so you understand where I come from. I was in 2012 in Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. Syrian refugees. At that time, I was crisis commissioner for the European Union. Syrian refugees were receiving support from us, and I met a girl. At that time, she was 13. Her name is Aisha. I asked her, what is it that she misses about Syria the most? And her answer was going to school. My first thought was to tell her, I really hope you would be able to go to school. And then I was embarrassed. I was kind of ashamed of myself because my hoping means nothing to her. But my acting so she can go to school means the world. So I walked back to Beirut and then met with colleagues. We created a huge program for Syrian refugees that led to double shifts in the countries in the region and huge increase in access to education. My point is, and I'm to that moment grateful to Aisha because she made me realize that my responsibility is to make her voice heard in the high corridors of power. And it is my responsibility as managing director of the IMF to make sure that countries invest in their own future and that this investment starts with investing in education. We have, I'm also grateful to Christine Lagarde. She put in place a policy to protect social spending, which is a way for the IMF, when we engage in programs, to ensure that the critical investment in education, health, and social protection is not eroded. And we are implementing this policy. It may not be well known, but the guidance to staff came on the basis of 44 pilot programs, how we can best do that. So be sure that the IMF is never going to step back for our commitment to education. And next time when there is a summit, I would be also there to tell people what is that we do. Now, why do we do that? Because you look at developing economies, and there young people are the majority of the population, 60%, 70% under 30. What do they want? They want a chance for a good job, for opportunities, if they want to turn into entrepreneurs, to do so. And both boys and girls deserve this opportunity. So we have adopted at the fund also this year our first ever gender strategy to make sure that boys and girls get this opportunity in life. And our programs in the last years, and again, I want to pay credit to Christine, they are successful only when we actually can show that young people are better off because of our engagement, not worse off. Now, going back to the question of, there was again a question of SDR. I think I addressed it. So let me move to the multilateralism and the 16th quarter review. Hugely important. We have a deadline by mid-December 2023. We are already engaging. I was encouraged by the last discussion we had with our executive board. There was more of a sense of we have to find a pathway to a successful completion. What is the cost of not completing successfully? It undermines the credibility of the IMF. It undermines our ability to serve our 190 members. So please do raise your voices whenever you are, that we strive to have a successful completion of the 16th quarter review. We strive to improve the representation of members. We strive to have the strength that a world of more frequent and devastating shocks requires from us. On the special funding programs, we can encourage countries to do that, but we ourselves, we do not have grant resources. As an organization, we are not in a position to fund these kinds of programs. What I would strongly recommend that this question is also brought to other organizations. The World Bank, for example, has a small grants program, and they actually do exactly what you're asking for, but that there is more attention paid to how civil society is able to be the voice that countries need, and how is this being funded. On Sri Lanka, we have worked hard to have a staff-level agreement, and now is the really important task of debt resolution for Sri Lanka. There are steps undertaken. We are urging those who are the creditors of Sri Lanka to please converge around a solution in line with our debt sustainability analysis. And since the question was from Malawi, right now we just completed a mission in Malawi. We recognize how difficult conditions in the country are, and we would like to see us coming with financial support as soon as possible.
Thank you, Madam.
Thanks, Kristalina.
Thank you, madam.
Kristalina, what do you think? We've got about 20 minutes left, and we've got this lineup of people. Should we ask them just to very, very quickly give their
I suggest
questions?
you guys just go one question per person, please, and as short as possible, and I will try to respond to each and every one of you.
Okay, let's do it. So let's go right to left here. Right.
Thank you very much. My name is Krista Gisaka, and I represent the Global Campaign for Education US. Thank you for speaking about the importance of education to resilience. Could you please share a bit more, and you did a bit, but share what the IMF is doing to strengthen quality inclusive education as countries recover from the learning losses of the COVID-19 pandemic and all of the other crises that you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kristalina, the last time we met, and then we spoke about in Bali 2018 AM.
Can you just identify yourself?
Oh, sorry. My name is Tenzao from the Public Legal Aid Network of Myanmar, Burma. Now also we are basing our policy matters here in the United States. We spoke about the winter is coming, quote unquote, it did came. But we were then more talking about the imminent debt crisis the world is facing at that time. We didn't know it would be COVID. But then we also have our devastating colleagues from Ukraine talking about the Crimea annexation, but now they had full-blown war. But on every UN Security Council, sort of like a monthly briefing with our civil society colleagues, we were talking about how the rest of the world's resources and finances are actually going and allocating to Ukraine, because we are with Ukraine. What can happen to Ukraine can happen to all of us. But at the same time, when I think all of our colleagues have echoed about how do we actually finance, this way forward, because COVID and other crises, the debt crisis, we're going to be staying with that. So in terms of, educating our kids, especially for Burma, we have a direct relation, because in the absence of government in Afghanistan or Burma, civil society is packing up all the slack. So how do we actually make sure that, through the mechanisms that IMF is formulating right now for way forward, to actually capitalize on, the people that you are seeing in this room, the civil society, to actually take part in the governing space? Because if you dump like aid to Burmese military or sort of like the people in Afghanistan, it's not going to the stakeholders. So
thank you so much.
I really need your feedback. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I see a couple of questions online also about this issue of equitable financing across countries. So good. Yes, sir. Please be brief.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Fodiba Siswari. I'm from Sierra Leone, and I work for ActionAid. ActionAid, we are releasing a report today, this Monday, on the care contradiction, looking at the IMF, gender, and austerity. And my question is the IMF willing to actually change your core standard advice, where the evidence is compelling, of negative impact on women, rather than just suggest mitigating action, such as targeted social protection? And in the context of a just and fair transition, a fair recovery, how do we expect poor countries like Sierra Leone, that is spending a significant portion of our local revenue on debt servicing, how do you expect such a country to emerge from this crisis? What can IMF do? Is it too late for the IMF to do something about this? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Please.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm Shireen Talat from the Arab Watch Regional Coalition. And actually, I was very impressed and happy when you said that the food crisis problem is solvable. Because coming from the MENA region, we know that we are heading to a hunger crisis. It's not all anymore a food crisis. So it's a hunger crisis, a climate crisis. But hearing you saying that is solvable, that means I expect more from the IMF side to make this solvable. And maybe one of the steps that the IMF can take to make it solvable is eliminating surcharges. As you know, surcharges is acting against the Article 1 of the IMF, against the spirit of the IMF dedicated to help the members. And it puts a lot of burdens in our economies. Yes, we are middle-income countries in the MENA region to low-income countries, but we all suffers, and our economy suffers with us, but people suffer more. And I believe eliminating surcharges can be a good step because, again, it's not only against the Article 1, it's also against human rights and the sustainability of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Recognize this face here. Caroline, nice to see you.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Kristalina. Nice to see you. One issue that is not getting enough attention right now, and you alluded to it briefly on your agenda, but is on pandemic preparedness. I'm Carolyn Reynolds. I'm co-founder of the Pandemic Action Network. We're a global advocacy network of more than 300 partners around the world, focused on driving collective action to get political leaders to do what's necessary to end this pandemic and prevent the next one. But suddenly, it seems as if everyone is declaring this pandemic over, and even in the agenda you laid out and President Malpass laid out, it's not front and center, right? What we need to do now this is a solvable crisis. We know what we need to do to end this one and also to prevent the next one. We have more than 20 organizations who are signing a letter to G20 leaders to tell them to follow up on the commitments that have been made, whether it's on SDR allocations, on to push forward the MDB reform agenda, to commit resources to the pandemic fund. But we know it's not enough without the political will to put this and keep it front and center in the same way that climate is, right? These are global challenges that require global solutions. So what is your message to leaders this week on what we need to do to end this crisis and prevent the next one?
Thanks, Caroline. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Amir Bani Amir. I'm coming from Jordan, from Al Hayat Center, Rasid. My direct question, you were about stability and resilience. You were talking about stability and resilience and the economic. My specific question about MENA region. We think that there are some early signs that this stability and resilience for the economics in the MENA region is fragile or it's for a while. Do you have some concerns about this stability for the economic in the MENA region countries? Which countries more like concern about their economy? There are an early signs or something with IMF about this economic in the MENA region stability. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try and leave Kristalina at least 5 minutes to respond, but let's try.
I'm Abby Nash, the Senior Campaigns Director from Jubilee USA, and I'd like to follow up on Daniela's question. We know you understand the importance of debt relief and restructuring initiatives from distressed countries, but there's much value to seeing strong support from senior leadership. We know private creditors have already been told that you want them to come to the table. What do you plan to do to bring both future but also current private creditors to the table?
Thank you so much. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Bob Tansey, Global Policy Lead from the Nature Conservancy. Part of the long-term solution to providing people food and nutrition at place is to shift financing, subsidies and other financing to support small holders to more sustainable practices for agriculture, for fisheries, for aquaculture. How does that happen in practice? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Nabil Abdou. I'm with Oxfam International. At the beginning of your intervention, you talked about inflation and the need for policy tightening. Last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development issued a report warning against this kind of advice to rich countries, saying that the Fed's action in increasing interest rates are expected to cut an estimated $3.6 trillion in future income for developing countries, excluding China. And they're saying that this kind of increase that you are supporting is also pushing austerity in low-income countries, in developing countries. Why would your advice defer to that of UNCTAD? And then do you think that these kind of actions are driving countries to the brink? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take this one, and I'm going to take one online just to be inclusive, the last hand raised online. Please.
Thank you. My name is Yolanda Fresnillo. I'm with Eurodat, the European Network on Debt and Development. I also wanted to ask on debt, on the debt issue, because it is one of the key issues to solve the humanitarian crisis in the Global South. And I wanted to ask about what are the IMF intentions in using the tools that they have in hand to have earlier debt restructurings. IMF research finds out that the earlier the debt restructuring happens, the better results. And I'm asking particularly about the lending into arrears policy and how proactively is the IMF going to be in allowing countries to default before it's too late, before they are in a very critical situation, so they can enter that restructuring earlier. And if I may, I was also wanted to ask about the debt sustainability framework for low-income countries, if there is any review upcoming, if there's any news about transparency on the DSAs, civil society, particularly from the affected countries, would like to access the DSAs in that country to know what is being asked or what is being on the table for the countries. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And last one online, this is the last hand raised. It's Richard Abubakar Umar. Richard, you're joining us from Nigeria. Please come in, and please be brief, Richard, if I may ask you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity for community-based organization on the front line in Nigeria, especially as regards climate change, have the platform to come to attend an event like this. Yeah, my question is on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement on loss and damage. Frontline communities in Nigeria today we're currently underwater. Communities have been submerged and economics have been ruined. Livelihoods have been, it's so pathetic that livelihoods have just crumbled. Now children are out of school, their schools are submerged by water, and this cuts across communities around the River Niger down to River Benue to the Cameroons. Now, what is IMF doing to see that frontline communities that are facing this climate crisis as a result of climate change get compensated and get reactivated into green economies, into livelihoods? Because now, for example, I'm from Mina, Niger State, Nigeria. We have the largest landmass in Nigeria. My state, we have 76,336 square meters of land. The conservation is threatened as I speak to you because production of charcoal and firewood will be the next source of livelihood for these communities. So how does IMF provide succor in terms of access to funding for community on the front line to have alternative source of livelihood in climate crisis like this? And how does IMF intend to make access to funds like green climate funds accessible, easily accessible to frontline organizations like us, especially community-based organizations that are interfacing with these communities on a regular basis? So, and as COP27 is drawing close, what is IMF doing to push the large polluters into making that fiscal commitment? Denmark have just made a commitment of about $12 million, which some advocates are feeling is small, but to me is very impactful. They are pushing the talk.
Thank you, Richard.
So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Richard. Kristalina, totally unfair. I think I'm counting about 12 or 13 questions at least in 5 minutes.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, go. Quality of education. What we saw during COVID is that countries with high penetration of internet were able to sustain education much better than countries with lower penetration. Guess who is on the lower penetration side? On average, 50% of Africa. And then you look at low-income countries outside of Africa. This is a source of unfairness today that is going to only grow. We, at the IMF, we recommend very strongly for countries to leapfrog. We have seen the impact of digitalization in India. Leapfrogging really is helping the country tremendously. So we are not an investment organization. We don't do project finance, but we recommend to organizations that do project finance to prioritize digitalization as a fundamental factor for access to education for all kids everywhere. And we integrate this in our Article 4 consultations. We look at what can be done. Digitalization is also a platform for financial inclusion, and digitalization plays a growing role in terms of monetary policy because of central bank digital currencies, the development of crypto. So it is bigger than education, and education is not just about digital. You need teachers, you need schoolrooms, you need the capacity to bring youth up to par with the demands of today and tomorrow. And again, this is what we see as a very important priority. We basically want a change in mindset. Education is not a cost. Education is investment. The best investment countries can make. When you look at, oh, no, stop. Move to the next one. Equitable financing. Of course, I'm very mindful that what we face today is a situation in which advanced economies have domestic pressures. They themselves have many of them a cost of living crisis. They need to support their people. They need to support their businesses. There is the tremendous disruption that Russia's war has created, and that also leads to dedicated support for Ukraine. All of this is at a time when we need more, not less, in vulnerable developing countries, in emerging markets that are vulnerable, in low-income countries. So I'm completely with you on we have to muster the will to provide fairly support to countries everywhere. For us at the IMF, what it means is we have about $700 billion in our lending capacity. We have created the on-lending of SDRs as a way to increase what we can do to pursue our commitment to countries and prioritize countries that are most at need. And of course, speak loud and clear of the importance of helping those that are most severely impacted. This is a theme that we will be bringing forward during the annual meetings. On the question, by the way, there was a question from somebody from Sierra Leone. I just want to say Sierra Leone, a great example of prioritizing education. Great example. So what is it that we can do on social protection to not be turning fiscal prudence into an undermining of countries' prospects? And that is what I talked about. We put a floor on social spending, and we work very hard to make our capacity development, our programs, a powerful source of higher quality of spending. And I can say that I see this personally as a very important instrument. The fund has to impact not only how much countries spend, but how well they spend and how they measure success. I am completely on the same page with those who spoke about debt burden, because it has grown during COVID for an important reason, to protect people and the economy, but with the consequence that servicing that is becoming prohibitive for many low-income countries. I would jump to the question of lending into arrears. We have done one operation, it was for Suriname, and we are telling our membership and we are telling creditors, both public and private, look, we much prefer that you act early and restructure that, so we don't have to go into lending into arrears, because we don't want countries to default. We want their debt to be sustainable. But we have this policy, and obviously we have to judge on how much progress is made on that restructuring and see whether or not the case is for using it more often. I was asked about surcharges. This is a conversation that continues at the IMF. And just to give you, since we are short of time, to give you the straight answer when it would continue, we have in December a discussion on our precautionary facilities. And in this discussion, we also would be discussing surcharges. Just to make a point, those who are in favor of surcharges, they also have a reason because they are to provide an incentive to middle-income countries to not borrow excessively and to pay faster, to decrease their share in the borrowing from the fund. But this being said, it is a topic that is there. There are many voices on it, and we would have time to discuss it. Pandemic preparedness. I mean, the simple answer is there is a great report that was submitted to the G20. Just implement the recommendations of the report, and this is the position we take at the IMF. I agree that attention has started slipping. You would even hear people talking as if the pandemic never happened. It did. It actually still is affecting us. And who is to say there would not be another one? So what do we say to that? Well, the number one recommendation of the report is strong health systems and then good global surveillance. We have this in place. There is no excuse if there is another pandemic and we say, oh, we didn't think there would be another one. So at least in our work, we have made the Resilience and Sustainability Trust. It is eligible to borrow for pandemic preparedness. We have only one request in that category for now, but it is open for that. MENA. There is strength in MENA, and there are, of course, there are also risks in MENA. You ask me where the risks are highest. I'm not going to say anything that you don't know. You look at Lebanon. The political elite really needs to get in high gear to help the country. It has been unnecessarily protracted. A process we had in May, staff level agreement, was it May? Yeah. I think May. It was a long time ago. Summer, yeah. Or June maybe. I apologize if I got the date, but it was a long time ago, and we don't yet have the prior actions that we have identified completed. It is Yemen, a country that has been devastated by a war. Now there is some indication of stability. Let's build on that. And when we look at the MENA region, there are countries we work with. For us, Pakistan is a part of MENA region. We do want to see programs where we have them to work as a stabilizer for the country and, of course, for the region. And we have Afghanistan, where I don't need to say how difficult the conditions are. Jordan is doing well. You said you were from Jordan. Yes, Jordan is doing well. It is one of these anchors of stability, but we should not take this for granted, because if there is instability elsewhere, trouble travels. On the bringing the private sector on that to the table, yes, this is something that we are very engaged on. We're thinking of some proactive steps in that direction together with the World Bank. Sustainable agriculture practices. Look, I mean, if we are to have a chance to see through the climate crisis, it is, of course, to bring emissions down, but it is also to adapt to it. And that means climate resilient agriculture. So sustainable agriculture is a lifeline for us as humanity. We don't, again, we are not an investment provider, we are a policy provider, and that is where we are aiming to put for our policy advice to help build that kind of sustainable, inclusive, with small farmers, and especially with women farmers being a subject to policy attention. On UNCTAD, so UNCTAD, I mean, I would respectfully disagree. I think that the risk of inflation spinning out of control is still with us if you look at the numbers. I lived through hyperinflation. My country in the mid-90s got very bad policies that led to hyperinflation. Everybody's savings disappeared overnight. Goods disappeared overnight. I think I was telling you, getting up 4 o'clock in the morning to queue to buy milk for my daughter. So inflation is a very serious threat. And if you look at the rates, perhaps the language we use is more forward-leaning than reality. In many, many places, rates are still not in real rate territory. In other words, we are still normalizing, not tightening. And then if you look at countries that are better positioned today and are not hit by a dollar appreciation, like Brazil, what did they do? They saw it coming and they went into tightening early. As a result, they have stronger fundamentals, and stronger fundamentals is what we want to see everywhere. Of course, we do agree with UNCTAD on another issue, which is countries that are being hit, they must be helped. We must work together to support them. There we have no disagreement. For early debt restructuring, what are the tools? I mean, we are indeed relying on just giving countries and their creditors a mirror. Look at the mirror. What you see there, that is not sustainable. You're going to lose your money anyway because the country is not going to be able to pay. So what are you waiting for? Act early. By the way, I also say to our members, act early. If you see that you need support from the fund, don't wait until it is too late. We have precautionary facilities. We can help you. Come early. And on transparency of DSAs, of course, we are working with the World Bank to see what more we can do to make the DSAs, make the mirror even more effective. I covered them not in 5 minutes though, so I can't claim that. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you, everybody.
Fantastic, Kristalina. Thanks so much. Kristalina has stayed on almost another 15 minutes, guys, and I think that's, again, testament to how important she regards this particular forum with you.
Yep.
We do have
Speak up. Speak up. Speak up.
We do have to finish. I'll tell you why. Because just in about 30 minutes, there's another event here with Kristalina and with Vanessa Nakati, you know, the environmental climate activist from Uganda. You all know who she is. And she's going to be here at noon. and so is Kristalina. And it's in this room, so we have to finish. And just with thanks to all of you, and thanks again to Kristalina.
Thank you. Thank you.
Channel 1. Interpretation 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 Channel 1.